Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, fellow wrestling fanatics. My name is Ken Hill, and I'd like to welcome you to the debut of my show, The Wrestling Connection. Essentially, what it is, to give you a brief introduction, it's a wrestling forum. I've been a wrestling fan for a number of years, 13 years, as a matter of fact. I've been involved in writing wrestling columns for 411mania.com. I've done wrestling analysis, and one of my big dreams is to one day be a voice, maybe the voice of World Wrestling Entertainment. But for right now, what I want to do is bring to you a small piece of my world, and I'm going to do so today. You see, one of my favorite wrestlers growing up was Stone Cold Steve Austin. He was during the late '90s, early 2000s. He was that anti-authority figure. He was counterculture. He was in your face. He was always flipping off his boss. He was screwing around with people. He would do things just because he wanted to do it. He'd drink beer. He'd kick ass. He'd stomp mud holes. He would do anything. Anything that he wanted. And that just stuck in the craw of every authority figure in World Wrestling Entertainment. It's particularly that of the boss himself, Vincent Kennedy McMahon. And of course, when you have an anti-authority figure like Stone Cold, a rebel, and you have the boss, Mr. McMahon, they're going to clash. It's eventuality. They're going to clash so many times. And it was none more evident than in 1999. 1999, one of the big years for professional wrestling. You had The Rock. You had The Rock as the WWF champion. You had Mick Foley, Mankind as the underdog challenger. You had the corporation in full effect. You had Mr. McMahon. You had the Stooges. You had Kane, China, Big Boss Man, all dominating Raw and SmackDown, trying to keep all the superstars down, trying to dominate the airwaves in professional wrestling. But there was one man who stood up against all that: Stone Cold Steve Austin. And the fact that he would, no matter who Mr. McMahon threw against him, no matter who he threw against him, no matter handicap matches, having Austin's arm tied behind his back, gauntlet matches, no matter what Mr. McMahon threw in Austin's way, Austin would just keep coming at him. And it came to a point at the beginning of 1999, the Royal Rumble pay-per-view, one of WWE's marquee events, the start of the road to WrestleMania, to the grandest stage of them all. And you had Austin in the number one position, put there by who else? Mr. McMahon, a two-time winner and the biggest threat to The Rock, not only the WWF champion, but the corporation's champion. McMahon would do anything to keep Austin away from that. And Mr. McMahon himself even ended up being entered into the Royal Rumble at the number 2 position. Not an enviable position, particularly when he was in the ring with Stone Cold himself, something he'd been trying to avoid the entire time they were feuding. Mr. McMahon would do everything he could to keep Austin out of the Rumble. He'd run around he would have Austin chase him around the arena. He would have corporation members ambush him, try to keep him out of the ring while Mr. McMahon just hid in a corner, while all the other wrestlers and superstars would eliminate each other from the Rumble. But of course, it was only a matter of time before Austin found his way back. And it would come down to Austin and McMahon, the first two, to be the last two in the Royal Rumble, after all 30 men had come and gone. The Rock would come out. He would help Mr. McMahon pulling Austin over the rope and seemingly cost Austin his championship match. Mr. McMahon had won. Mr. McMahon would be supposedly going to WrestleMania, only for us to find out that he wouldn't want to face his own champion, so he waived his championship opportunity. He signed it away. Not so fast, though. Mr. McMahon had failed to realize that the man who made the matches, the commissioner of the WWF at the time, Shawn Michaels, the showstopper, the main event, the icon himself, he would stick his craw into Mr. McMahon's business. He revealed a rule, a technicality, that if the winner of the Royal Rumble would have to surrender, if he was unable or was unwilling to cash in his championship opportunity, would surrender it to the runner-up of the Royal Rumble match. That being, at the time, Stone Cold Steve Austin. It was something that Mr. McMahon abhorred. He didn't want Austin anywhere near the main event. So of course, but there was something else that was brewing between Austin and McMahon. This feud had been brewing for months, nearly a year. And Austin, more than anything, even more than his championship match at WrestleMania, wanted Mr. McMahon one-on-one so he could finally get his hands on him. The man who had caused him so much strife in his career for the past year. And he was even going so far as to put up his championship opportunity against The Rock at WrestleMania just to get McMahon in the ring one-on-one. And he knew McMahon loved to run. He loved to run away. He loved to hide himself. He'd love to put himself just out of Stone Cold's reach. Not anymore. Stone Cold had this match made a steel cage match. And when would this vaunted steel cage match take place? February 14th, 1999, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Oh, of course, it was known for the, of course, when anyone says St. Valentine's Day Massacre, the first name that comes to mind is Al Capone. I could guarantee you, though, this pay-per-view would be just as controversial and hopefully not as messy. Of course, and Mr. McMahon did everything he could to soften up Stone Cold. He put him in gauntlet matches. He put him in matches where his arm was tied behind his back. He did everything he could to get Austin as soft up as he could so it would be an even playing field. All for naught. Come to pay-per-view, Austin came roaring out, would beat McMahon thusly. He would bash him off the steel cage. He would bounce his head off the announce tables. He would go so far as to when McMahon tried climbing up the cage to get away from Austin, Austin would pull him off and crash him through the table. McMahon was essentially, he was unconscious. He was beaten to within an inch of his life, and the match hadn't even started. I mean, the corporation couldn't come. McMahon even promised earlier that the corporation would not be out to help him. He had no help, no one whatsoever to come out to his rescue. No China, no Kane, no Big Boss Man. Not even The Rock was allowed out there. It was just McMahon and Austin, and McMahon was already beaten, and the bell hadn't even been rung. As the EMTs would come out to ringside and cart off Mr. McMahon, Austin was about to be declared the winner by default, but or as Austin would say, Austin would not be denied. He would get on the mic and said, and I quote, as long as that you know what's breathing in and out, we still have a match. So get him in, roll his carcass in this ring, and ring that bell. Austin got his wish. He would bash McMahon off the steel cage. He would bust him wide open. McMahon had the proverbial crimson mask going. And it seemed like Austin was just about ready to walk out of the cage. He'd gotten his fill. He was ready to go. But then out of nowhere, from underneath the ring, emerged a colossus, a giant, a man that looked like he weighed 500 pounds, 7 feet tall. It turned out that McMahon had gotten some help, who was not a member of the corporation. The former giant of WCW, Paul White, who would later go on to be known as The Big Show. And it seemed like McMahon's plan had come to fruition. White was tossing Austin around like a rag doll, beating him down, chokeslamming him, bashing him into the cage walls. And it seemed like that McMahon was ready to have Paul White deliver the finishing blow, just heave Austin into the cage. McMahon would walk out. Austin's championship match would be lost to the breeze. Only McMahon did his job. Only Paul White did his job just a little too well. As he heaved Austin into the cage door gave way, swung open. Austin fell to the ringside floor, and of course, as most wrestling fans would know, in a cage match, if your first person's feet hit the floor, is the winner. Austin would win the championship match. He would win the cage match. He would retain his championship match for WrestleMania, and go on to beat The Rock. But that's not the point of this match. The point of this match highlighted the kind of boss that Mr. McMahon was. You don't see most bosses getting involved. You don't see most managers going up the plate to take a swing in major leagues. You don't see coaches. You don't see coaches go like lining up on the offensive line, ready to take a snap in football. But Mr. McMahon was crazy enough if it would help his company make a few bucks, he would get in the ring with the most dangerous men in his company and take his licks and get beat up, get busted open, bleed buckets, get beaten halfway across from one end of the arena to the other if it would help push his product. I mean, and it wasn't just with Austin. Over the years, McMahon would face a number of his creations. Shawn Michaels, Hulk Hogan, The Rock, Triple H. He would even go so far as to face the very man he screwed in Montreal in 1996, Bret Hart, in one of the WrestleMania grudge matches that we'd like to forget. But anyway, today I wanted to show you what I have to offer to the community, to reintroduce you to what makes wrestling great. The characters, the storylines, the drama, and just give you a little glimpse into the world that I have come to admire, to appreciate, and become enraptured by over the last 13 years. Now, on next week's full edition of the Wrestling Connection, I will be here along with my co-hosts, Zach Martinkus and Robert Price, two of my fellow wrestling fanatics, and we will be previewing the upcoming World Wrestling Entertainment pay-per-view, The Elimination Chamber. We'll go over its history. We'll go over the undercard and the main event for the match on Sunday night, and make our big predictions to who will win and who will go on to main event WrestleMania.